I found out my wife has been secretly meeting her ex every week, and now she's filing for divorce so they can move in together and take my kids with them. The news hit me like a punch to the gut. There I was, standing in the kitchen, coffee going cold in my hand, as Emily, 34F, my wife of 10 years, told me she wanted a divorce. Her face was tense, but there was a strange calm in her eyes that I hadn't seen before, as though she'd already settled into the reality of this decision long before I had any idea it was coming. At first, I thought it was a joke, some horrible misunderstanding. But as she went on, the truth came crashing down in waves. "I've been meeting Ryan, 36M," she said, her tone as steady as if she were reading off a grocery list. "I didn't want you to find out this way, but it's serious, Mark, 36M. I want to be with him. I'm filing for divorce." I stared at her, unable to process her words. Ryan, her ex from before we met, the guy she described as her first love in passing once, years ago, when we were still getting to know each other. You're serious. You've been meeting him this whole time." She nodded, looking down as if to avoid my gaze. "I didn't plan for it to go this way. But we reconnected, and it just made me realize that we're both in different places now. I don't want to drag this out and make it more painful than it has to be." A strange calm settled over me, an eerie kind of numbness. "And what about the kids?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. We had 2 young kids, our whole lives intertwined in a home built together. The idea of splitting everything apart was one thing, but losing them? She hesitated, biting her lip. "I think it would be best if they came with me. Ryan and I have already discussed it, and it just makes sense. We'd be able to give them a stable home." "Stable?" I interrupted, disbelief thickening my voice. "You're breaking up our family, and you're calling it stability." She winced, but the resolve in her eyes didn't waver. "Mark, I don't want to fight you on this. I know this is hard, but we've been drifting apart for a long time. We both felt it. I think deep down, you knew something wasn't right." I shook my head, a bitter laugh escaping before I could stop it. "So you've been having this whole relationship behind my back, and now you're telling me that it's somehow our fault? That I should just let you walk away with our kids so you can play house with someone else? I don't want to take them from you, Mark, but it would be better if they stayed with me, at least at first, until things settle down." The shock was fading, replaced by a white-hot anger. "Until things settle down. Do you even hear yourself, Emily? You're ripping our lives apart, and you think you get to just take them away." She sighed, frustration flickering across her face. "This isn't easy for me either, Mark, but I need you to understand that this is happening. I've already filed the papers, and Ryan and I have talked about what the next steps would look like." I felt the floor give way beneath me. She filed the papers. This wasn't just a whim, some dramatic threat. She was serious. "So that's it then? You're leaving me for him, taking the kids, and acting like this is what's best for everyone?" Her gaze softened, a hint of guilt creeping in. "I know you're hurting, and I'm sorry it happened this way. But I want you to know that we can work something out, something that allows you to still be in their lives. I can't pretend to be happy anymore." I set down my coffee mug with a clatter, the anger pulsing through me. "Pretend to be happy? I thought we were building something real here, a life, a family. And all this time, you were meeting him behind my back." "It wasn't all this time, Mark," she replied, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "I tried to work things out, but every time we had another fight, every time I felt that distance between us, it pushed me closer to him. So you decided to just throw everything away without even trying to fix it." My voice shook as I tried to wrap my head around it all. "We could have worked on this, Emily. We could have done therapy, anything. But you made this decision on your own." She shook her head, an almost resigned sadness in her eyes. "By the time I realized what I wanted, it was too late for that. I need you to understand, Mark. I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said bitterly. "Mission accomplished." I looked at her, feeling the weight of betrayal settle deep in my bones. This was the woman I'd trusted with everything, the mother of my kids, the person I'd built my life around. And now she was asking me to just let it all go, to step aside and let her take our family with her. After a long, tense silence, she finally stood up, looking at me with a mixture of pity and regret. I'll be staying at my sister's for a while. I think it's best if we both have some space. She left without another word, her footsteps echoing through the house. I stayed rooted to the spot, staring blankly at the walls that had once felt like home. Now, they were empty, hollow, a painful reminder of everything that was slipping through my fingers. In the days that followed, I could barely keep myself together. Every time I looked at our kids, my heart broke all over again, the thought of losing them clawing at me. I knew I had to fight back, to protect the life we'd built, but the betrayal cut so deep that I didn't know where to start. I spent sleepless nights trying to make sense of it all, replaying every argument, every moment of distance, wondering if I'd missed the signs. But every time, I came back to the same realization: she had made her choice. And now, I had to make mine. The reality of what was happening began to sink in. I was on the brink of losing not only my marriage but my role as a father, as the stable figure in my kids' lives. I wasn't going to let that happen. I wasn't going to let her take everything we built just because she decided to rekindle an old flame. As painful as it was, I knew I couldn't let Emily and Ryan dictate the terms of our family's future. I needed to stand up, to fight for my kids, to make sure they didn't get swept into a life I hadn't agreed to. The next step was clear, if daunting. I needed to talk to a lawyer. If Emily was going to move forward with this, I wouldn't go down without a fight. I owed that much to myself, and to my kids. In the days after Emily dropped the bombshell, I moved like a man possessed. Every free moment was spent researching family lawyers, scrolling through testimonials, making calls. By the end of the week, I found someone, Karen, 45F, a seasoned attorney who came highly recommended. She had a reputation for being relentless in court, and when we met in her office, I could see why. Her demeanor was calm but sharp, as if she could cut through the chaos with a single look. After I'd explained everything, she looked at me thoughtfully, her pen tapping against her notepad. "This is a tough situation, Mark," she said, her voice steady. "But you're doing the right thing by coming to me now. We have to be proactive, especially if she's already filed." The reality of it all hit me like a punch. The fact that Emily had filed for divorce before even telling me was hard enough to stomach, but the thought of her trying to take the kids and start a new life with Ryan was even worse. "What are my chances?" I asked, feeling the weight of the question as it left my mouth. Karen didn't sugarcoat it. Family courts are complicated, and outcomes depend on a lot of factors. But what we're looking at here is a custody battle. If Emily's intent is to take the kids with her and move in with this man, we'll need to show that your home is the more stable, familiar environment for them. Courts are very interested in stability and consistency for children. Stable, I said bitterly. How is it stable for them to be uprooted and moved in with a man they barely know? Karen nodded, acknowledging my frustration. It's a fair argument, and we'll use it. But remember, the court's focus is on the kids' best interests. We need to build a case showing that it's best for them to stay here with you, at least for primary custody. Do you think Emily will be reasonable if we push for shared custody? I shook my head, frustration boiling under the surface. If she'd wanted to be reasonable, she wouldn't have blindsided me with this. She's convinced herself that this is what's best for them, no matter what I think. Karen nodded thoughtfully, jotting down a few notes. In that case, we'll proceed as if she'll fight us on everything. I need you to start keeping a record of everything. Communication with her, any moments where you're with the kids, anything that shows your involvement in their daily lives. We'll build a picture of who you are as a father, someone who's actively involved, who provides a stable, loving environment. I took a deep breath, my mind already racing with ways to document every part of my life with the kids. I'd never had to prove my role as a father before. I'd just done it, naturally, every day. But now I'd have to capture it in a way it would hold up in court in front of people who didn't know us. Leaving Karen's office that day, I felt a strange sense of empowerment mixed with dread. The fight ahead would be brutal, but I knew I couldn't afford to back down. My kids needed me, and if Emily thought she could just uproot them and take them into her new life with Ryan, she had another thing coming. The next few weeks were an emotional whirlwind. Emily was still living with her sister, and every interaction between us was tense, icy. Whenever she came to pick up the kids or drop them off, she kept her tone polite but distant, as if she were already preparing for the separation to be finalized. It was surreal to stand face to face with the woman I'd once considered my partner in everything, only to realize that she had already moved on. One evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Emily called. It was the first time we'd talked outside of logistics for the kids since she filed for divorce, and her tone was as if nothing unusual were happening. "Mark," she began, her voice softened, almost pitying. "I know you're upset, and I don't blame you, but I'm hoping we can make this transition as easy as possible for the kids. We need to put them first." I clenched the phone tighter, my frustration simmering. "I've always put them first, Emily. That's what this whole fight is about, making sure they don't get torn away from the life they know." She sighed, sounding genuinely weary. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. The kids need stability, and you and I both know this marriage hasn't been stable for a long time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You think stability is moving them into a new house with a new man just because you decided he's what you want?" "It's not that simple, Mark," she replied, a hint of defensiveness in her voice. "Ryan and I are serious about this. We're offering them a happy home, and we're committed to raising them together." I laughed bitterly, unable to hide my anger. "Committed? He hasn't been there for them at all, Emily. This isn't just about your happiness. It's about what's best for them." She fell silent, and I could hear her exhale slowly, as if trying to keep her composure. "I'm not doing this to hurt you, Mark. I really do believe that this is best. You'll still see them. We'll work out a custody arrangement." "No, Emily," I interrupted, my voice firm. "I'm not just going to see them. I want to be their father, not some visitor in their lives. They need me, just like they need you." Another long pause, and when she spoke again, her voice was colder. "Fine. If that's how you want it, we'll let the court decide. But I hope you know that you're only making this harder for everyone." After we hung up, I stood in the darkened kitchen, the weight of her words settling over me. She'd made up her mind, and now I had to be prepared to fight her in court, to face whatever accusations or arguments she might throw my way. It felt surreal, the realization that the woman I had once shared my life with had become someone I could barely recognize. The next day, Karen helped me prepare for what could lie ahead. We went through every possible scenario, every potential argument Emily might make, and every piece of evidence we could gather to support my case. I dug up photos, school records, and even small notes from teachers that showed my involvement in the kids' lives. I reached out to neighbors, friends, and even a few of Emily's family members, hoping to get statements of support. Every moment spent doing this only deepened my resolve. If Emily thought she could replace me in our children's lives, she was in for a harsh reality check. When the first court date arrived, I found myself sitting across from her and Ryan, his hand resting protectively over hers. He shot me a sympathetic look, as if he were the understanding friend who just happened to step in during a rough patch in our marriage, rather than the man who played a role in tearing it apart. I ignored him, focusing instead on my lawyer and the documents I'd brought. Karen had spent hours coaching me on how to keep my emotions in check, how to stay calm and avoid reacting to whatever they might say. She reminded me that appearances were crucial, that I needed to show the judge the stability and security I offered my kids. Emily's lawyer argued that her moving in with Ryan would give the children a new, stable household with two dedicated parents. They painted me as someone clinging to the past, unwilling to move forward, and even hinted that my anger over the divorce could be damaging for the children. It took every ounce of self-control to keep from reacting, to stay focused on Karen's plan and trust the process. When it was my turn to speak, I told the judge everything about my role in our children's lives, the home we built together, and how uprooting them for Emily's new relationship would disrupt their sense of stability. I emphasized that I wanted what was best for them, that I was willing to share custody but wasn't willing to let them be taken away. By the end of the hearing, the judge ordered a temporary custody arrangement, shared custody, with the kids splitting their time between both of us while a more thorough evaluation took place. It wasn't the outcome I'd hoped for, but it was a start. At least for now, I hadn't lost them. As we left the courtroom, I caught Emily's gaze. There was no regret in her expression, only a hardened resolve. Ryan stood by her side, and for the first time, I felt a strange acceptance settle over me. She had made her choice, and now I had to live with it. But as I watched her walk away, I knew one thing with certainty. I wasn't giving up. My kids were my world, and if it took everything I had, I would fight to make sure they had the stability, love, and presence they deserved. The weeks following that first court date were a blur of legal paperwork, meetings with Karen, and trying to create as normal a life as possible for my kids, Ellie, 8F, and Sam, 5M, who were caught in the middle of everything. I focused on making every moment count. We went to the park, I helped with Ellie's homework, and we had movie nights in the living room, just the three of us. Every little moment felt heightened, precious, as if I had to capture each one to prove I was enough for them. But beneath the surface, tension was brewing. Emily had moved in with Ryan by then, and every time the kids came back from a weekend with them, they seemed quieter, more withdrawn. Ellie, usually so chatty and full of stories, would look at me with eyes too knowing for an 8-year-old. Sam, my adventurous little guy, started clinging to me more, holding onto my hand as if he were afraid I'd vanish. One evening, as I was tucking Ellie into bed, she looked up at me, a worried expression on her face. "Dad," she whispered, "why can't we all just live together? With Mom and Ryan too?" Her words hit me like a sucker punch, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. I took a breath, doing my best to keep my voice calm. "Sweetheart, sometimes families don't stay the way we're used to. Mom and I, we have some things to work out. But I'll always be here for you, okay? No matter what." She nodded, but the worry in her eyes didn't go away. I left her room that night feeling like I'd failed her, like nothing I could say would ease the confusion that was slowly starting to take root. Then, a few days later, as I was picking up the kids from Emily's place, I finally ran into Ryan directly. He was standing in the doorway, all too friendly, like he was waiting for an opportunity to talk. As the kids climbed into my car, he stepped closer, giving me an easy, practiced smile. "Hey, Mark," he said, his tone casual, like we were old friends. "Just wanted to make sure everything's going okay on your end. I know this isn't easy for any of us." I stared at him, barely holding back the urge to tell him exactly what I thought of his supportive attitude. "Everything's fine," I replied tersely, focusing on buckling Sam's seatbelt. "Just here to pick up my kids." He nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "Look, I get it. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But I care about Ellie and Sam too. Emily and I want to make this as smooth as possible for everyone." The audacity of it hit me hard. He played a role in shattering my family, and now he was trying to paint himself as some concerned father figure. I felt the anger rise, but I forced myself to keep calm for the kids' sake. "I'm not here to make small talk, Ryan. I'm here because they're my kids, and they deserve stability." Ryan's expression hardened, just for a moment, before he caught himself. "I just hope we can all get along for their sake." Without another word, I shut the car door and drove off, gripping the wheel until my knuckles turned white. I could see Ellie watching me from the back seat, her brow furrowed with worry. I forced a smile and asked her about her day, doing my best to push the anger aside. But Ryan's words echoed in my head the entire drive home. The court proceedings continued, with both sides presenting evidence of our suitability to raise Ellie and Sam. Emily's lawyer focused heavily on the arguments that transitioning to a new, complete household with two stable parents would benefit the kids. They presented evidence that I was inflexible and unwilling to cooperate, painting me as a barrier to the family unity she claimed to want. Karen fought back, presenting my active role in our children's lives, their routines and stability with me, and my genuine commitment to their well-being. She argued that uprooting them for Emily's new relationship would cause unnecessary disruption and confusion, emphasizing the consistency I provided since they were born. One day, after a particularly grueling court session, Karen suggested something new: a court-appointed child psychologist who could evaluate the children and make recommendations about custody based on their own observations. She assured me that this would give a voice to what the kids themselves were experiencing, which could only help our case. Emily, though reluctant, eventually agreed, and soon, Ellie and Sam were scheduled for a series of sessions with Dr. Parker, 50F, a compassionate, down-to-earth psychologist with years of experience in family court cases. A few weeks later, Dr. Parker invited me to meet with her privately to discuss her observations. I sat across from her in a quiet office, my heart pounding as I waited to hear what she had to say. "Mark," she began gently, her tone reassuring, "I've spent time with both Ellie and Sam, and I want to commend you on the way you've handled this. Your children clearly feel safe and loved with you, and that's crucial during such a difficult time. Relief washed over me, but I could see there was more. And how do they feel about Emily and Ryan? Dr. Parker hesitated, carefully choosing her words. They're adjusting to the situation, but it's clear they're struggling with the changes. Ellie has mentioned feeling caught in the middle, and Sam is showing signs of separation anxiety. This isn't uncommon in cases like yours, but the abrupt shift in their environment with Emily and Ryan has caused confusion for them. The pain in my chest tightened. I'd known they were struggling, but hearing it confirmed was harder than I'd expected. What does this mean for custody? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Dr. Parker smiled kindly. I'll be making my recommendations to the court soon, and I believe the priority should be stability, whatever that looks like in the kids' best interest. I'm advocating for a balance that allows them to feel secure, and in my opinion, that balance leans heavily on the stability they've had with you. It felt like a weight lifting. I nodded, barely able to hold back tears of relief. Thank you, Dr. Parker. I just want what's best for them. I can see that, she said warmly, and I'll be making that clear to the court. The day of the final custody hearing arrived, and I found myself once again facing Emily and Ryan in court. Dr. Parker's report was presented as evidence, her findings supporting the idea that the kids needed a stable, consistent home life, something I'd been providing all along. Karen presented my case clearly, methodically, drawing from every piece of evidence we gathered, from Dr. Parker's findings to statements from friends and family about my relationship with Ellie and Sam. When Emily's lawyer argued back, emphasizing her commitment to a stable two-parent household with Ryan, Karen pointed out the sudden nature of their relationship and the fact that uprooting the kids for a new home environment would disrupt their routine and support network. As the arguments wrapped up, the judge looked over our case carefully, taking his time before delivering his decision. When he finally spoke, his words were like a balm over every worry, every sleepless night. After reviewing the evidence and recommendations, I believe it's in the best interest of the children for Mr. Cooper to retain primary custody, the judge announced. Mrs. Cooper will have significant visitation rights, and both parties are encouraged to work together to maintain a sense of stability and unity for Ellie and Sam's well-being. I barely heard the rest. The words primary custody echoed in my head, a wave of relief and gratitude washing over me. I felt the weight of months of fear and anger lift, replaced by a fierce determination to give my kids the life they deserved. As we left the courtroom, Emily shot me a bitter look, but I barely noticed. I had my kids. I protected their stability, their home, their future. When we got home that night, I gathered Ellie and Sam into my arms, holding them close. They didn't understand all the details, but they knew they were safe, that they were home. And as I sat with them, I knew that, despite everything I'd lost, I'd managed to keep the one thing that mattered most. The weeks following the judge's decision were a strange mix of relief and adjustment. With primary custody granted to me, Ellie and Sam stayed home, settling back into a routine that felt familiar and safe. Emily's weekend visits began immediately, and I could tell she wasn't happy with the court's decision. Every interaction with her was tense, her disappointment lingering in the way she looked at me, as if she couldn't quite believe things had turned out this way. The kids sensed it too, though I did my best to shield them from it. Whenever I dropped them off at Emily's or she came by to pick them up, I kept our conversations polite but brief for their sake. Still, there was no avoiding the resentment she carried, the frustration that seemed to spill over even in her tone with the kids. I worried about it, but I knew I couldn't control her side of things. I could only be there for Ellie and Sam and ensure they felt loved and secure. One Friday evening, as I was packing their bags for the weekend, Ellie came up to me, her brow furrowed. "Dad," she began hesitantly, "why does Mom seem so mad at you?" The question hit me hard, and I took a deep breath before answering. "Your mom and I just have different ideas about things, Ellie. Sometimes, when grown-ups go through big changes, it takes them a while to feel okay again. But no matter what, we both love you and Sam very much." She nodded, but I could tell my answer hadn't entirely satisfied her. Still, she didn't press any further, and I was grateful for that. I wanted to protect her from the full weight of what was happening. She was a child, and it wasn't her burden to carry. The first few weekends were challenging. When Ellie and Sam returned, they seemed distant, as if they were trying to process everything in their own way. Sam became quieter, clinging to me more than usual, and Ellie, normally cheerful and talkative, grew reserved, her thoughts turned inward. I worried that the back and forth between two very different environments was starting to wear on them, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I hoped that over time, things would smooth out and the new arrangement would start to feel normal. Then, one Sunday evening, when I was putting them to bed, Ellie asked a question that nearly broke me. "Dad, is it okay to love Ryan?" she whispered, looking at me with wide, uncertain eyes. My heart sank, and I forced myself to keep my expression calm. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied gently. "It's okay to care about him. It's okay to love all the people in your life who make you feel safe and happy." She nodded, seeming relieved. "Mom says he's going to be like a dad to us too, and I didn't want you to be mad if I started to like him." The words were like a dagger, but I kept my voice steady. "Ellie, no matter what, I'll always be your dad. You can love other people too, and that doesn't change anything between us, okay? I'll always be here." She hugged me tightly, and I could feel her tiny hands gripping my shoulders as if for reassurance. It pained me to think of the confusion she must be feeling, the weight of having to navigate these complicated relationships at such a young age. After she went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, grappling with the storm of emotions her question had stirred. The thought of Ryan stepping into my role, even in a small way, was something I hadn't been prepared for. I'd fought so hard to keep Ellie and Sam close, to protect the life we'd built together, and now I was forced to make room for this new reality, one in which I wasn't their only father figure. That week, I confided in Karen, needing her practical perspective more than ever. "It's not just the custody anymore," I explained, struggling to keep my voice steady. "It's the idea that they're growing attached to him. I don't know how to handle it." Karen's gaze was sympathetic, and she nodded thoughtfully. "Mark, I know this isn't easy, but in situations like this, it's important to keep your focus on what's best for Ellie and Sam. They're already dealing with a lot, and seeing you handle things gracefully can make all the difference. But what about him being their other dad? How am I supposed to be okay with that?" Karen took a breath, her expression softening. "It's natural to feel protective, especially after everything you've been through. But the fact that they're comfortable with Ryan doesn't mean they love you any less. You're their father, Mark. Nothing will ever change that." Her words offered some comfort, but they didn't entirely take away the sting. I knew I'd have to find a way to accept this new reality for the kids' sake. They deserved the chance to feel safe, loved, and supported, even if it meant they were opening their hearts to someone else. In the following weeks, I made a conscious effort to be positive whenever the kids mentioned Ryan or their time at their mom's house. It was difficult, but every time I saw the relief on Ellie's face or the way Sam's smile returned, I knew it was worth it. The last thing I wanted was to put them in a position where they felt they had to choose. And slowly, it seemed to work. Ellie and Sam became more open, telling me stories about their time with their mom, their new routines, the things they did with Ryan. At first, each story felt like a test of my resolve, but over time, I began to see it differently. Their openness meant they felt safe with me, that they trusted me enough to share their lives fully, without fear of judgment or anger. Then, one evening as we were making dinner, Ellie looked up at me, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Dad, you know what Ryan said about you." I tensed, but forced a smile. "What did he say?" She grinned. "He said you must be the coolest dad because you always do the best stuff with us. He said he could never keep up with all the games you play." I chuckled, surprised and a little relieved. "Well, I'll take that as a compliment." In that moment, I felt a strange, unexpected sense of peace. If Ryan could respect my role as their father, maybe, just maybe, this co-parenting arrangement could work. I'd been so focused on what I might lose, but here was a reminder of what I still had: my kids' love, their trust, and a bond that no amount of distance or change could break. After putting them to bed that night, I sat in the quiet house, reflecting on how far we'd come. Emily's choices had shaken everything, left me feeling stripped of the life I'd known, but the court's decision had been a reminder of the strength I found in myself to protect my family. I couldn't change what she'd done, couldn't erase the presence of Ryan in their lives, but I could continue to be the father they'd always known, the one constant they could count on. The next time I saw Emily, I noticed a shift in her demeanor. She was still distant, still guarded, but there was less tension, less resentment. Maybe she'd sensed my acceptance, or maybe time had softened her own anger. Whatever it was, it made the transitions easier for the kids, and for that, I was grateful. In the months that followed, our new normal solidified. I was still their primary parent, the one they relied on day to day, the one who stayed up helping with school projects and knew the names of their friends. And even as they spent time with Emily and Ryan, our bond remained unshakable. Looking back on the journey, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I'd come through the darkest period of my life with a deeper understanding of myself, of the strength I carried, and of the love that bound me to my children. No matter what the future held, I knew one thing. I was their dad, now and always, and nothing would ever change that. As the years went on, our family's rhythm settled into something that, while not traditional, became comfortable and secure. Ellie and Sam continued to split time between my home and Emily's, and though the logistics of co-parenting were often challenging, we found a balance. Emily and I could communicate civilly, sometimes even warmly, and Ryan, who had once resented as an invader of my family, became someone I could respect for the role he played in the kids' lives. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. One Saturday morning, as I was cooking breakfast, Sam came rushing in, waving a piece of paper with a proud grin. "Dad, I got an A on my science project," he beamed, holding it up like a trophy. I pulled him into a hug, ruffling his hair. "That's amazing, buddy. You've been working so hard. I'm really proud of you." He hugged me back tightly, then launched into a detailed explanation of his project, something about volcanoes and eruptions, complete with sound effects and exaggerated hand gestures. Ellie joined us, laughing as she shared her own stories from school, and soon the kitchen was filled with the sounds of their laughter and excitement. After breakfast, I looked at them both, my heart swelling with a pride and gratitude I couldn't fully describe. In the midst of everything we'd been through, they'd grown into confident, resilient kids. And I knew that every fight, every struggle, every difficult decision had been worth it. Later that day, I took them to the park, where they played and ran around with the kind of carefree joy I hoped they'd always have. Watching them, I felt a sense of peace that had taken years to find. It was a realization that I'd been so afraid of losing my role in their lives, but the bond we shared was undeniable, something stronger than any disruption or change. They were mine in the deepest sense, and that would never change. When we got home that evening, I received a message from Emily asking if we could talk. She rarely reached out unless it was about the kids, so I was curious and a bit wary, as I agreed. She arrived shortly after, her expression thoughtful, almost vulnerable. As we sat down in the living room, she took a deep breath, hesitating before she spoke. "I just wanted to say, thank you," she began, her voice soft, "for how you've handled everything. I know I didn't make it easy on you, and I know this wasn't the life you imagined. But you've been a great father to Ellie and Sam, even when I was difficult." Her words took me by surprise, and for a moment, I wasn't sure what to say. The anger and resentment I'd once held toward her had faded over time, softened by the life we'd managed to build for our kids. But hearing her acknowledgement, her gratitude, felt like a closing of a chapter I'd long since left behind. "I didn't do it for me," I replied, my voice steady. "I did it for them. They're the ones who mattered most, and they always will." She nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. "I know, and they're so lucky to have you. Ryan and I both see how much they adore you, how they look up to you. We couldn't have done this without you." The sincerity in her eyes struck me deeply, and for the first time, I felt a genuine forgiveness settle within me, not for her or for Ryan, but for myself. I'd been holding onto a fear of not being enough for my kids, of losing them to a life beyond my own. But here was the proof that I'd been there all along, that my role in their lives was something no one could ever take away. As she left that evening, I felt lighter, as though the final remnants of that difficult chapter had drifted away. I stood by the door, watching her walk to her car, and in that moment, I saw her not as the person who'd hurt me, but as the mother of my children, the woman I had once loved, and someone I could finally wish well. That night, as I tucked Ellie and Sam into bed, I told them both how much I loved them, how proud I was to be their dad. They snuggled into their blankets, their faces peaceful, and as I closed their doors, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. In the months that followed, I continued to build my life around them. I went to their school events, cheered them on at sports games, and helped them navigate the inevitable ups and downs of growing up. The more I showed up, the stronger our bond became, rooted in a trust and love that had endured the hardest of tests. Years later, as Ellie prepared to graduate from high school and Sam entered his teenage years, I realized that the journey of fatherhood was still unfolding, still evolving. But one thing was clear. I'd done everything I could to be there for them, to give them a life filled with love and stability. And as they moved into their own futures, carrying pieces of our journey with them, I knew that I'd given them the greatest gift I could, the unwavering, enduring love of a father who would always be there, no matter what.